So here we go. Today I'm going to be recording a book reading video slash video, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm going to be reading a Christmas Memory by Truman Capote, and if any of you recognize him from his novella, which turned into a screenplay called Breakfast at Tiffany's, quite famous in the movie, although very different from his initial novella. So, I hope you guys enjoy. This was published by Modern Library, so disclaimer, it's not mine. I apologize for the birds. So, it has a Christmas memory, one Christmas, and Thanksgiving visitor. I'm gonna start the Christmas memory. Actually, I'm gonna go one Christmas because it's shorter. So, I hope you guys are sticking to this. One Christmas. For Gertrude Thumbthigh. First, a brief autobiographical prologue. My mother, who was exceptionally intelligent, was the most beautiful girl in Alabama. Everyone said so, and it was true. And when she was 16 years old, she was married to a 28-year-old businessman who came from a New Orleans family. The marriage lasted a year. My mother was too young to be a mother or a wife. She was also too ambitious. She wanted to go to college and to have a career, so she left her husband. And as for what to do with me, she disposed of me in the care of her large Alabama family. I apologize if I trip over any words. Over the years, I seldom saw either of my parents. My father was occupied in New Orleans, and my mother, after graduating from college, was making a success for herself in New York. So as far as I was concerned, this was not an unpleasant situation. I was happy where I was. I had many kindly relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins, particularly one cousin, an elderly, white-haired, slightly crippled woman named Sook, Miss Sook Folk. I had other friends, but she was by far my best friend. It was Sook who told me about Santa Claus, his flowing beard, his red suit, his jangling present-filled sled, and I believed her just as I believed that everything was in God's will or the Lord's, as Sook always called him. If I stubbed my toe or fell off a horse or caught a good-sized fish at a creek, well, good or bad, it was all God's will. And that was what Sook said when she received the frightening news from New Orleans. My father wanted me to travel there to spend Christmas with him. I cried. I didn't want to go. I never left this small, isolated Alabama town, surrounded by forests, farms, and rivers. I had never gone to sleep without Sook combing her fingers through my hair and kissing me goodnight. Then, too, I was afraid of strangers. And my father was a stranger. I had seen him several times, but the memory was a haze. I had no idea what he looked like, but Sook said it's the Lord's will. And who knows, buddy, maybe you'll see snow. Snow? Until I could read myself, Sook read me many stories, and it seemed a lot of snow was in almost all of them, drifting, dazzling, fairy tales flakes. It was something I dreamed about, something magical, mysterious, that I wanted to see and feel and touch. Of course I had never, and neither had Sook, How could we, living in a place like Alabama? I don't know why she thought I would see snow in New Orleans, for New Orleans is even hotter. Never mind. She was just trying to give me the courage to make the trip. I had a new suit. It had a it had a card pinned to the lapel with my name and address. That was in case I got lost. You see, I had to make the trip alone. By bus, well, everyone thought I'd be safe with my tag. Everyone but me. I was scared to death and angry. Furious at my father, this stranger who was forcing me to leave my home and be away from Souk at Christmas time. It was a 400-mile trip, something like that. My bus stop was in a Mobile. I changed buses there and rode along forever and forever through swampy lands and along the sea coast until we arrived in a large city, twinkling with trolley cars and packed with dangerous foreign-looking people. That was New Orleans. And suddenly I stepped off the bus. A man swept me in his arms, squeezed the breath out of me, laughing. He was crying. A tall, good-looking man, laughing and crying. He said, "Don't you know me? Don't you know your daddy?" I was speechless. I didn't say a word. At last, while we were riding along the taxi, I asked, "Where is it?" "Our house? It's not too far." "Not our house. The snow." "What snow?" I thought there would be a lot of snow. He looked at me strangely but laughed. "There's never been snow in New Orleans, but not that I heard of. But listen, hear that thunder? It's going to rain." I don't know what scared me most, the thunder, the sizzling zigzag of the lightning that followed it, or my father. That night I went to bed. It was still raining. I said my prayers and prayed that I would be home with Souk. I didn't know how I could ever go to sleep without Souk to kiss me goodnight. The fact was I couldn't go to sleep, so I began to wonder about what would Santa Claus bring me. I wanted a pearl-handled knife and a big jigsaw puzzle, a cowboy hat with matching lasso, and a BB rifle to shoot sparrows. Years later, when I did have a BB rifle, I shot a mockingbird with a bow tie, and I could never forget the regret I felt, the grief. I had never killed another thing, and every fish I caught I threw back into the water. And I wanted a big box of crayons, and most of all, a radio. But I knew that was impossible. I didn't know 10 people who had radios. Remember, this was the Great Depression, and in the Deep South, houses were furnished with radios or refrigerators were rare. My father had both. He seemed to have everything, a car with a rumble seat, not to mention an old, pretty pink little house in French Quarter with iron lace balconies and a secret patio garden colored with flowers and cooled by a fountain shaped like a mermaid. He had half a dozen, I say a full dozen, lady friends, like my mother. My father had not remarried, but they both had determined admirers, and willingly or not, eventually walked to the path to the altar. In fact, my father had walked six times. So you can see that he must have had charm. Indeed, he seemed to charm most everybody except me. That was because he embarrassed me so, always hauling me around to meet his friends, everybody from the banker to the barber who shaved him every day, and of course all his lady friends. And the worst part, all the time he was hugging and kissing me and bragging about me. I felt so ashamed. First of all, there was nothing to brag about. I was a real country boy. I believed in Jesus and faithfully said my prayers. I knew Santa Claus... Shut up, Katie dog. I knew Santa Claus existed, and at home in Alabama, except to go to church, I never wore shoes winter or summer. It was pure torture being pulled around the streets of New Orleans in those tightly laced, hot as hell, heavy as lead shoes. I don't know what was worse, shoes or the food. Back home, I used to fried chicken and collard greens and buttered beans, cornbread and other comforting things. But these New Orleans restaurants, I'd never forget my first oyster. It was like a bad dream sliding down my throat. Decades passed before I swallowed another. As for all that spicy Creole cookery, Just to think of it gave me heartburn. No, sir, I hankered after biscuits right from the stove and fresh milk from the cows and homemade molasses straight from the bucket. My poor father had no idea how miserable I was, partly because I never let him see it, certainly never told him, and partly because, despite my mother's protests, he had managed to get legal custody of me for this Christmas holiday. He would say, "Tell the truth, you don't want to come here and live with me in New Orleans." "I can't." "What do you mean you can't? I miss Sook, I miss Queenie. We have a little rat terrier, a funny little thing. We both love her." He said, "Don't you love me?" I said, "Yes." But the truth was, except for Sook and Queenie and a few cousins and a picture of my beautiful mother beside my bed, I had no real idea what love meant. I soon found out. That day before Christmas, as we were walking along Canal Street, I stopped dead still and mesmerized by a magical object that I saw in the window of a big toy store. It was a modeled airplane large enough to sit and pedal like a bicycle. It was green and had a red propeller. I was convinced that if you pedaled fast enough, it would take off and fly. Now, wouldn't that be something? I could just see my cousins standing on the ground while I flew among the clouds. Talk about green. I laughed and laughed and laughed. It was the first thing I had done that made my father confident, even though he didn't know what I thought was so funny. Then I prayed that Santa Claus would bring me the airplane. My father had already bought a Christmas tree. We spent a great deal of time at a five and dime picking out things to decorate it with. I made a mistake. I put a picture of my mother under the tree. The moment my father saw it, he turned white and began to tremble. I didn't know what to do, but he did. He went to the cabinet and took out a tall glass and a bottle. I recognized the bottle because my Alabama uncles had plenty just like it. Prohibition moonshine. He filled the tall glass and drank it with a hearty pause, and after that, it was as though the picture had vanished. And as I awaited Christmas Eve, the always exciting advent of Fat Santa, of course, I had never seen a weighted, jangling, belly-swollen giant flop down a chimney and gaily dispose of his largesse under a Christmas tree. My cousin Billy Bob, who was mean little runt, but had a brain like a fist made of iron, said it was a lot of honey, and there was no such creature. "My foot," he said, "anyone would believe there was any Santa would believe a mule was a horse." This quarrel took place in a little courthouse square. I said, "There is a Santa Claus because he does what is in the Lord's will, and whatever is in the Lord's will is the truth." But Billy Bob, spitting on the ground, walked away. "Well, it looks like we got another preacher on our hands." I always swore I'd never go to sleep on Christmas Eve. I wanted to hear the prancing dance of the reindeers on the roof, and to be right there at the foot of the chimney to shake hands with Santa Claus. But on this particular Christmas Eve, nothing, it seemed to me, could be easier than staying awake. My father's house had 3 floors and 7 rooms, several of them huge, especially 3 leading to the patio garden, a parlor, a dining room, and a musical room for those who like to dance and play and deal cards. The 2 floors above were trimmed with lacy balconies whose dark green iron were intrinsically decorated and entwined with bougainvillea and ripening vines of scarlet spider orchids and a plant that resembled lizards flicking their red tongues. It was a kind of house best displayed by lacquered floors and some wicker here and some velvet there. It could have been mistaken for the house of a rich man. Rather, it was a place of man with an